bringing John to the conversation. 97.3 ESPN. Eagles and NFL Insider is with us here on the Sports Bash. And what are they trying to find in this 2013 film to try to fix Nick Foles? It's been 4 years since he's been that guy, John. Can they get him back?
Well, let me just say, I think Howie Roseman probably has a picture of Chip Kelly at the security gate. He is not allowed on the premises.
That's great.
But I think if you look at that offense and the success Nick Foles had, it kind of tells you what he is as a quarterback. And he's not a very anticipatory thrower. So basically what he does and what he is successful at is throwing to open receivers. That can be a problem in the NFL because the windows are much smaller. And the one thing Chip did very, very well early in his tenure here was sort of take people by surprise, and you'd often see wide open receivers because of the tempo, and that's why Nick was successful. I don't know if you can recreate that at this point.
I don't know what you felt about, because I wasn't here last week, but I don't know how you felt about Nick playing in the final game. I didn't see a whole lot of positive that could come from him playing in that game. I think you saw why, because if he was negative, then the sky was falling in. If he played pretty well, he was still going to sit out for 2 weeks. So I don't know what they had to gain by him playing all that much in that game. But because he did play in the game and didn't look very good, did you sense today that Doug has lost some confidence in his quarterback?
No, I mean, I think everybody's lost confidence in the quarterback, to be honest, but he hasn't shown that. He's got to, this is his only option. People talking about going to Nate Sudfeld, that's just silly. This guy played, that was the first NFL game he played in a meaningless situation.
Just to be clear, I'm not advocating that, by the way.
And neither am I, but he did look good.
Yeah. And at least Nick is a veteran guy who's been in a playoff situation in the past. He started games in the past. So that's the way you have to go. But I don't think anybody who's watched Nick Foles over the past 1+ games, obviously he only played 4 drives against the Cowboys, has much confidence in him right now. How could you? But I will say this. The weather played a part in this, in that it was so brutally cold over both of those 2 games. Nick doesn't have the strongest arm in the world. He couldn't cut through the cold. It's not Brett Favre out there. And by the way, you saw Derek Carr struggle. You saw Dak Prescott struggle. The early weather forecast is going to be high 30s for January 13th. So it's going to be a much better environment, and maybe you can hang your hat on that.
Almost balmy with that degrees and those temperatures, what the projections are. You know, John, some players after the game, they talked about how they're actually looking forward to getting back in pads this week. What's the plan there? Does Doug want to maximize that once this week, once next week? What's the plan for them wanting to get back in pads and them coming to him about it?
Yeah, they have to, and they kind of realize it. And Doug kind of scaled back the last 2 weeks of the regular season to keep everybody as healthy as possible, to keep some of the veteran legs fresh. He went to a lot of walkthroughs, really no physicality. And the players said, we got to get in pads. We got to get back to what we do well. We got to get back to being physical. And this is going to be January football. And if the Eagles are going to win, they're going to have to do it with defense and the running game. And they got to put on pads to get used to that.
Real quick, one of the things, you talked about this, I heard, I don't know if it was on last week or during one of the Countdown to Kickoff shows recently, but they're kind of in an unenvious position that Dallas was in the year before, that Dallas won the division at 13-3, played a meaningless game, and had to sit around and just did not come out of the gates very crisp in that playoff game. And Philly is in a similar, an identical situation where they are the team that was 13-3, clinched, didn't have anything to play for, and now they're sitting around. And not only are they sitting around, they're doing it with a quarterback who hasn't played all that much. They're in almost the worst possible situation you could think of.
Well, I don't go that far. I did say that, and if you go back basically 365 days, I predicted the Cowboys would not win again. They would lose to the Eagles. They did. And I thought Aaron Rodgers would win the first-round playoff game. He did, and go in and beat them. The good part of that is there is no Aaron Rodgers this time. So you don't have to worry about that. It's always a good situation to have a bye week in this league. It's a good situation to play at home. The defense has played it lights out. It's a very difficult place to play. So I won't say they're in a bad position. In fact, this is the only position they could be in where you have any hope whatsoever with Nick Foles playing quarterback. If they're on the road, you're dead and buried.
John, what about
I would agree with that, by the way.
I would agree with that, too. They are at home, but what about the scenario, too, where, and I think Doug was asked about this today, that because Foles hasn't shown much, the teams might just load up against the run?
Well, he hasn't shown much, and I think they do understand, and Doug mentioned January football, it's going to have to be the running game first and foremost, and then make a key throw here and there, especially if that weather forecast doesn't improve and doesn't turn out right, and it's another blustery day with the wind chills in the teens. Nick has proven he can't get the football outside the numbers in weather like that. I mean, that's not changing. So you have to get better running the football. Midway through the season, the Eagles were very, very effective. They gotten away from it. Doug talked about the lack of execution, maybe the fact they went to a lot of walkthroughs. The consistency wasn't there for the offensive line. It's certainly something that has to be clicking on all cylinders on January 13th. And remember, Jay Ajayi is probably not going to practice tomorrow because he's dealing with that cranky knee. It's a chronic issue with him. It's not a new injury. It dates back to his college days. So you have to throw that into the equation as well.
Did Doug, you mentioned Jay Ajayi, did Doug reveal that they might try to give Jay Ajayi more work, or did he reveal sort of his pecking order or how he feels the running back should be used going forward?
Well, he can't practice. So, hey, he's got to be healthy. But, yeah, he's the guy. You kind of saw that late in the season before they shut him down for the Dallas game. He had taken the top role in the committee approach. I don't think the committee approach changes. I think everybody's going to get their touches, and by everybody I mean LeGarrette Blount and Corey Clement, even Kenyon Barner, a touch or two. I don't think that part of it changes. If Ajayi's healthy, though, he's the lead guy in that committee now.
Jon McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles getting ready for their first playoff game. You asked today the three potential opponents. How do you prepare when you don't know who you're playing? How does it? What is this week like getting ready for an opponent you don't know who it is yet?
Well, it's like a bye week, really, in the regular season, and the fact you go into more of a self-scout mode, and you start to look at what you've been doing well, what you haven't been doing well. It's probably the bigger issue, certainly from an offensive standpoint, and you try to figure out what's gone wrong there. And then the heavy game planning obviously starts next week after you understand who your opponent is going to be. So from that, I mean, they'll take a look at all three teams in a cursory manner. but there's not much you can do from a preparation game plan standpoint until you know who you're going to play.
Yeah, couple quick things on the Eagles, too. A lot of their assistants are going to be interviewing. That's been a storyline in the NFL the last couple of years. Doug has kind of said, look, they're going to be ready, which I don't doubt, but you wrote a piece that really stands out about with this group of coaches, you got to make your run now, because we saw when Andy started to lose his coaches, he wasn't the same coach. This is an important year with what they have. The foundation is here now to win, because I think DeFilippo is going to get a job. I'm not sure about Reich. Schwartz is 50-50, but somebody's not going to be here.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And interesting, I probably agree with you. I think Flip is the one guy who's probably out the door because everybody wants to follow the Sean McVay route in Los Angeles. That's sort of the hot thing, to find the quarterback whisperer, the young offensive mind. And Chicago would make a ton of sense because they really have to rescue Mitchell Trubisky, who has not looked good this season. I also think Jim Schwartz is deserving of a second opportunity to be a head coach in this league. And there's no heir apparent, especially for Schwartz, on this staff. I mean, I've argued if you were doing the Mount Rushmore of defensive minds in the current NFL, I think Jim's on it with Wade Phillips, Mike Zimmer, Bill Belichick. I think those are the four best defensive minds. And elevating Corey Unlin, that's not the same thing. I like Corey, but that's not the same thing. And even if you go out and get a Steve Spagnuolo in sort of a trade, that's not the same thing. And it's going to be difficult, at least on the offensive side of the football. You know, Frank's the offensive coordinator. As long as you can keep him, I think you're on a good path. But if they lose Jim Schwartz, that is a big, big blow.
If they lose Jim Schwartz, if they lose DeFilippo, John, do you think that Carson Wentz then struggles because he's lost his Wentz whisperer?
No, I think it's the opposite. I think John should go down 42 in South Jersey and knock on Carson's door and say, thank you very much, because Carson Wentz is going to make anybody look good.
All right, John.
I love John, by the way. I think he does a great job, but hey, Carson's he's that good.
John, let's look around at what's happening in the league, because things are happening, some which we expected, some which we didn't expect. I don't think anybody had Jack Del Rio getting fired and the potential replacement here. Now, connecting the dots would say, if you fire Del Rio this quickly, you must be very certain that you have a guy in mind. Otherwise, wouldn't you keep Del Rio around until you were told no by the other guy?
Yeah, I mean, I always thought it was a chance that Jack would be out because
I'm not saying it's shocking, not shocking, but a little bit of a surprise.
Well, a little bit. I think the bigger surprise is Gruden is probably coming back, because I in a lot of ways, I think he liked being mentioned for these jobs all the time better than the actual thought of going back to the grind of actually being a head coach. But he loves the Raiders. He never wanted to leave there. And maybe that's the only situation he would have come back for. And in Jack's mind, I mean, he made a mistake at offensive coordinator. Should have never moved on from Bill Musgrave and gave Todd Downing the job. And Derek Carr took a huge step back, and that's why he's out.
Are you as enamored with Gruden coming back as casual fans seem to be every time this time of the year comes around and his name gets thrown out there?
No, his resume is vastly overrated. If you look at his last few years in Tampa, he's basically a 500 coach. arguably he won the Super Bowl with Tony Dungy's team, and that's not even their argument. He did. Tony built that team, and they were ready-made. And I think a lot of ways that's the coach that he is. If you have a veteran team that needs a push over the finish line, I think he would be a great choice. If you need to develop, especially young quarterbacks, there is no evidence he's been able to do that despite the reputation.
All right, let's look at some of these other things happening here. Detroit, Caldwell, same thing. Not a shock, little surprising. I mean, he had him to the playoffs last year, been to the playoffs a couple of times, won 9 games. Were you surprised about Caldwell?
No, because I think Bob Quinn came in after the GM. And anytime, GMs always want their own guys, but it's really difficult to fire a coach who makes the playoffs, as Caldwell did, even though they backed in last year. So the fact that they weren't able to make it this year opens the door and lets him go get a coach he feels more comfortable with. And that's just the way it goes. I mean, Jim probably didn't deserve to lose his job. And that's a very desirous spot because they have the quarterback. And Matthew Stafford is a very good quarterback. So they're going to have a job that a lot of coaches want, because to have success in this league, you need a quarterback.
Any names that you think make sense or that you can connect dots to Detroit?
Well, because Quinn is a New England guy, and that's where he came from, you start with Matt Patricia and Josh McDaniels. Those would be the two most obvious. I think because they have Stafford, it's not a necessity to get an offensive mind. I know Pat Shermer's going to interview there as well. So I think they can go the defensive route, but I would look at those Patriots guys first and foremost because Quinn is there.
Yeah, and a lot of those Patriots guys, Patricia and McDaniel, are getting some calls around. Indianapolis, we're not surprised about Pagano being gone, but their GM, Chris Ballard, came from Kansas City. So who makes sense for the Colts?
Same thing, because of where he comes from. You have to look at Dave Taub first, special teams coach in Kansas City, and also Matt Nagy, that sort of next in line in that Andy Reid tree with the offensive minds. He took over as offensive coordinator. He's high on the list, and you had to believe that they would have a leg up from being with the GM in Kansas City.
Bruce Arians, Temple guy, retires.
Yeah,
He's
the whole
done.
retiring thing, John, was kind of interesting, too, because he spent so much time saying, I don't know where you guys are getting that story from.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. Oh, by the way, I retire.
Yeah, I was going to tell you guys tomorrow, but I'll tell you now. All those reports were right. I'm out of here. So we've heard DeFilippo's name attached to the Cardinals. That one's kind of interesting because that's an aging team. That's not one of these young teams. And they were talking about, in fact, they brought this up yesterday, that they had won a couple games late. They were at the bottom. They were at the top of the draft. They started to win a little bit, and they put themselves back in the middle of the draft. So this doesn't seem like it's an envious situation.
Yeah, probably not, because of what we just talked about with the quarterbacks. That's what you look for. And it's Carson Palmer's obviously aging. He might retire himself now that Bruce Arians is gone. And Larry Fitzgerald might be next in line. So they're a rebuilding team, and they have to get that heir apparent, because it's not Drew Stanton, as impressive it is as he came back and played on at least a partially torn ACL. And obviously Blaine Gabbert's not the answer. They have to go out and get a quarterback.
The Giants, Gettleman is now in. They've already hired a GM. They didn't waste any time. GM in. He started axing guys before Week 17 even started. So the Giants seem like one of those organizations that won't make the flashy outside-the-box hire. But would you have a name kind of off the beaten path here, or do you think they'll go with a retread?
Well, no, they're going to go experience. John Maher's kind of already said that. And there's already a report that Jim is the favorite for that job, Jim Schwartz. And if you think about it and sort of read the tea leaves, Dave Gettleman was in Carolina. He had success with a defensive-minded coach, Ron Rivera. So that part of it makes sense. I think a lot of it depends on what they want to do with Eli Manning. If they want to move forward with Eli, which Mike, I think would be a terrible mistake, then I think they might go defense. If not, they're in the same boat as all these other teams looking for the young quarterback. Then you want the offensive mind in there, and that's where the Shermers and the McDaniels and those names pop up.
And then the Bears, another place where John DeFilippo's name has been mentioned.
He could work with Trubisky real well, don't you, John?
And well, let's mention that Ryan Pace is their GM, and he doesn't have a lot of connection around the league.
I will say, watching Mitchell Trubisky too much this year, he's not Carson Wentz. So if John does get that job, look, it's a storied organization. You certainly don't turn down one of 32 jobs, especially in that type of market. But good luck with that reclamation project.
All right, that's 6. Anybody else between now and the weekend getting their walking papers?
Well, we still have to see what happens with Marvin Lewis in Cincinnati. I can't imagine.
That story's unbelievable. I had read a tweet from somebody that suggested that Brown is afraid to kind of bring someone else in because he doesn't want to rock the boat in the organization.
Yeah, I mean, they have a very close relationship. And for people who don't understand, and it's been a long time, the Bengals were a mess before Marvin Lewis got there. And even though they didn't have any success in the playoffs, and we can all bring up the nobody's coached more games, never won a playoff game. Well, Cincinnati never got to the playoffs. And he got there a lot. So for them, that was a step up. And then you look at some of his assistants over the years. Mike Zimmer, most notably, one of the best coaches in football right now. Well, he was the Marvin Lewis guy. And Jay Gruden and Hugh Jackson. All these guys getting head coaching jobs, what tells you how much respect he has in the NFL. So while that's all the good part, the bad part is the shelf life. I mean, it's expired, and they need to move in a different direction, but it really is a close relationship between those two.
That should be interesting. So you got Cincinnati. We think that Cleveland's going to stay status quo. There were some other teams. Denver, how about that story with Vance Joseph? He was going to get fired, and I guess some of the players kind of said, give him one more shot, and Elway changed his mind.
Yeah, I hope he got some of those players some nice Christmas gifts because they saved his job. I mean, John had made his decision that it was going to be one and done, and the players spoke so highly of Vance Joseph that he decided to bring him back and also bring back Gary Kubiak as part of the front office to do some of the personnel stuff. And we'll see how it works out. But, yeah, that was basically a 180 in 24 hours.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Munchak, if they lose, done?
Malarkey?
What'd I say, Munchak?
Yeah.
Malarkey. I meant Munchak. I meant Malarkey.
It's all malarkey to me.
Yeah.
Possibility, yeah. And I don't think that would be fair. Bottom line is he got that team in the postseason. People say Marcus Mariota hasn't developed to where he should be, and they blame that on Mike Malarkey. I kind of look at it from the opposite point of view. I think he has done wonders with a kid who wasn't ready to play in this league and sort of built this strong offensive line and strong running game that has made him look better. So I think they would be wise to keep him, but there's a growing sort of sense that he's holding Marcus Mariota back, and I just think that's incorrect.
Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, I think he's going to stay. The whole thing there was that he doesn't get along with the GM, Rick Smith, and Smith has taken a leave of absence because his wife has cancer. And that's a horrible situation. But from that standpoint, you get two guys who seemingly couldn't work together apart. And I think if you saw what O'Brien was able to do with Deshaun Watson in that very short time before he was injured, you don't want to mess with that.
Gruden in Washington seems to be in. Cotter is in. Looks like what's his name out in Seattle? Carroll said, I'm too young to retire, so it looks like he'll stay. So it looks like we got a couple of things to keep an eye on, but everything else seems to be cleared up. So it should be an interesting coaching carousel. We'll, of course, go over all of it here on 97.3 ESPN. Johnny Mac at JF McMullen all week long, leading us into the playoffs here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks, John.
Hey, thanks, guys. Happy New Year.